Good to see each of you this morning. Glad that you are here with us. Do have an excellent assembly this morning. Grateful for your presence. If you came in after our announcements this morning, we want to remind you, if you will, please take a card on the back of the pew in front of you and fill that out. You can hand that to Jennifer or myself as you exit the building this morning after our worship assembly is over. And we just want to have a record of your attendance. But we are very, very grateful for your presence with us this morning. Lots going on, a lot happening. I do want to, before we get into our sermon this morning, want to kind of reiterate there in the bulletin. Hopefully you got a bulletin as you came in this morning. I know no one reads that, but at the end of the article is a little kind of a special note there for each of you. And as far as our addition that we're going to be getting started very, very soon. Matter of fact, I met with the builders on Tuesday. And so we're going to be getting all that going. It will just be a couple of weeks before we actually start breaking ground on that. So excited about that. Of course, in the foyer, you can see kind of an artist's conception of what that's going to look like. Obviously, the artist's conception and what the actual final product is going to be just a little bit different. There are a few minor changes, but by and large, those things are not going to change too much. And so he did actually a pretty good job. You might have some questions about some of those things. If you do, there in the foyer, there where the wood box is, or some yellow pieces of paper like so, write that question down, put that in the wood box there, and here in a couple of weeks I'll kind of gather all those together and kind of do an FAQ letter, so to speak, and kind of answer all those questions that you might have. Remember, if you have a question about it, probably most other people have a question about it too, okay? So don't be afraid to ask some questions. We want you to do that, and feel free to do that as well. Let's continue then our series on Christian apologetics, the defense of God. And again, referring back to our bulletin there on the back of the bulletin, you can follow along with our sermon. I'll explain that in just a second or two. But we want to note then about the existence of God, the proof that He does indeed exist, and why that is so important to us. First, let me answer this particular question you might have. Why are we paying so much attention to this particular subject? Here from the very beginning, we have talked about various proofs of the existence of God. Why are we talking about these things? Perhaps there is no greater time in human history than now that people have left not just the idea of, like the ancients, they were polytheistic. They believed in many gods. But now human beings are saying we don't even need any God whatsoever. That He has not, if He does exist, they say, that He has not shown us or proven to us His existence. And yet, we as those that love the Lord know different. That He has given us reason to believe in Him. He has given us many proofs. Many proofs. And so we want to look at those things. Our children are now growing up and attending schools where the classroom is even saying that there is no God. And so since that is the case, we want to make sure that our young people are well equipped, and we want to make sure that we too are well equipped with the knowledge that we can prove God's existence. You can see from I'll go ahead and apologize right away here, the title for our sermon this morning, God Answers Evolution. Well, let it be known that God doesn't need to answer anything. Let that be the very first thing that we need to understand. Job wanted God to come to him and say why it was that he was going through the difficulties of life. God arrived. That's all he needed to do, folks. He arrived. He didn't answer Job one thing. And yet at the conclusion, Job understood he was in no way could he question the God of heaven. When God shows up, we can't speak. We don't have the ability to speak. Because when God shows up in his full glory, we are just filled with awe. And that's all we can, as human beings, do. It is better then to obey him up front. Let's just obey him now. Give him glory now, so that when we see him in the hereafter, everything will be good. He doesn't answer evolution. He doesn't need to. However, the Bible gives us plenty of proofs. Not only does the Bible give us proofs, but it also points to proofs that we can see every day. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And so we have knowledge that he did. Now, let me introduce our subject this morning by saying this. I love my wife. You heard me correctly. That's right, I do. I love Jennifer. She's my wife. I love her. Do you know how she knows that I love her? Typically on Saturdays, we clean the house together. That's what we do. Absolutely. I get out the Windex and I clean all the mirrors and all the windows. Yesterday, I scrubbed all 3 toilets. Pretty good, huh? Not bad. Sorry, gentlemen. I apologize if I'm making you look bad. Jennifer and I, we have our arrangement. Everybody else has their own arrangement. Okay? Not everybody does what we do. She works during the week at the library. So guess what that means? Byron has to do. He has to chip in and help. He can't just sit back on Saturday and say, oh, all right, honey, you get to do it all. No, that would not be fair, would it? So he doesn't because he loves her. Here's my point. So cleaning the house. She's doing whatever she's doing. We happen to be in the living room at the time. And I look outside, and there's a beautiful female cardinal right there in the front yard. Wonderful. She was actually quite striking. Because, typically the female bird is a little bit more drab, just not as colorful as the male. But this female was different. She did not have, obviously, the bright red color that the male had, but she was very beautiful. I said, Jennifer, look at this. There's Mrs. Cardinal right over there. And then before I knew it, there comes Mr. Cardinal landing on the car. And then hop down, and they're both eating there in the yard where they're doing together. It was excellent. It doesn't get any better than that, does it? Isn't that wonderful? God is wonderful just from that, isn't he? He's great. And that got me to thinking, because it was a very touching moment, watching birds. Isn't that something? The next generation, we're not going to have to worry about Mr. and Mrs. Cardinal, are we? There's going to be another Mr. and Mrs. Cardinal, isn't there? 1,000 years ago, was there Mr. and Mrs. Cardinal? What about 2,000 years ago? What about 3,000 years ago? What about 4,000 years ago? 5? I'm going to stop at 6. Was there Mr. and Mrs. Cardinal 6,000 years ago? If the earth continues, will there be a Mr. and Mrs. Cardinal? Yes, absolutely. Why? Because that's how it works. Right? Mr. and Mrs. Cardinal are not going to have baby penguin. Are they? Nope. Mr. and Mrs. Cardinal are not going to have, you name it, that are not cardinal. We see that. We observe that every day, do we not? Every day we observe that. That's what we see. I mean, there's a point to that, folks, a big point. How did that come about? It came about because there are laws. Where do those laws come from? Those laws come from God. Now, I'm going to get a little bit sciencey on you, okay? Just a little bit, but I promise you, you're not going to get too glassy-eyed over it. Maybe a little glassy-eyed, but not too glassy-eyed. I hope you can read that a little bit. It might be a little small. I apologize for that. I've got 3 laws. Number 1, the first law of thermodynamics. All it means is this. It's a really big, long word, phrase, or whatever. All it means is this. Matter cannot be created or destroyed. In other words, if you have an atom or a molecule, you can't destroy it. But guess what? You can't make another one either. You can't create another atom. You say, oh, well, we create atoms all the time. No. You can smash 2 atoms together and you can produce energy and maybe 1 atom, but you started with 2. You didn't create a new one because you started with something. I'm talking about there's no more creation as in out of nothingness. All the matter that's in the universe is all we're going to get. We can't get any more. But you can't destroy it either. You can't burn it out. You can't collide it out. Again, if you smash 2 atoms together, you might get a lot of energy. That's really good stuff. But you're going to get energy and more matter. You're not going to destroy that. That's a law. You can't get around that law. How do I know that? Let's go to Genesis chapter 1. Rather, Genesis chapter 2. We spend a lot of time in Genesis chapter 1, do we not? But there is just as a significant thought in Genesis 2, verses 1 and 2, as all of Genesis chapter 1. In Genesis chapter 1, what do we witness? The creation of all things, correct? Well, guess what we find in Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 and 2? Here we go. Thus the heavens and the earth were, what's the word that you have there? Do you have the word complete or finished? Complete, finished. Nothing else added. Now, does that go along with the first law of thermodynamics, by the way? There's no matter created or destroyed? Absolutely. It goes right hand in hand, does it not? And all the host, all the stars, folks, all the universe. And on the 7th day, God ended his work which he had made. And he rested on the 7th day from all his work which he had made. Well, what was his work? Creating all things. He did that in 6 days. And on the 7th day, he did this right here. I'm done. Obviously, he did not do that literally. But if he had hands to do that, and here's his, he didn't do a weekend project, he did a week project. And in a whole week, he created everything that there is. Isn't that something? First law of thermodynamics. Okay, second law of thermodynamics. Everything is winding down. Everything tends toward entropy, E-N-T-R-O-P-Y, entropy. What does that mean? It means that when God created everything, it was like he wound up a clock, and then he let it go, and now it's winding down. And so we can see that everything's winding down. There's less and less energy that's able to be used. Things are getting further apart. The universe is expanding at an extremely rapid rate. How fast? I don't know how fast. It's fast. If you tried to get to the edge of the universe, it would outrun you no matter how fast you could go. That's fast. That's very fast. Second law of thermodynamics, less work is able to be used. We already talked about the law of causality, that for every physical effect, there must have been an equal or greater cause to cause that effect. And you cannot get around any of the laws of science. Open your Bibles with me to Job. We talked about Mr. Job. Let's talk about what God had to say to Mr. Job. How God himself illustrates that it's not nature that sets the boundaries. God tells us who sets the boundaries. Are you ready for this? Go to Job 38, verse 8 through 11. Job 38, verse 8 beginning. Job said, God, I want an advocate. I want the ability to come before you. And this is how God answers Job. Job, who shut up the sea with doors when it brake forth, as if it had issued out of the womb? That is, as though the sea had done that. When I made the cloud, the garment thereof, and the thick darkness as swaddling band for it, and break up for it my decreed place, and set bars and doors. In other words, he set limits. And said, hitherto shalt thou come, but no further. And here shall thy proud waves be stayed. Who created gravity? That's what keeps the sea from running amok, right? Gravity. The properties of water. Who set those things? Did nature set those things? No, the God of heaven set those things. So the God of heaven gave the laws of science. And from day 7 of creation until the Lord returns, those laws cannot be broken. Not one day we're going to find a way around them. No. They cannot be broken. I guess you could try, but you will be sadly mistaken. Point number 2. Oh, and by the way, if you are looking in your Defending the Faith Bible, we're on probably page 22. He deals with the Big Bang Theory in a concise look, he says. Now, they give 15. We're going to look at 6. 6. They give 15. We're not looking at all 15. Okay, the eternal universe. I like a good science fiction show or movie. I like science fiction. I think they're fun. It's great. We have, as a matter of fact, my watch is really the result of science fiction. Some of us are old enough to remember the old Dick Tracy, right? Mr. Tracy, Detective Tracy, I got something better. Yeah, something a lot better. We can remember that. Science fiction is good. It's great. It's wonderful for entertainment, but should never come to us as facts. Well, people want, that is, some people who do not want to have God in their mind, they need because either you have the spiritual is eternal or matter is eternal. Which one is it? Is the physical world eternal or is the spiritual world eternal? Well, that's the physical world. That's always been. So we've got to find a way to have it to continue. So we are going to make up, that's right, their words, not mine. Scientists have said this. We're going to make up some stuff. It's called dark matter or dark energy. I'm sorry, I thought science was something that was observable. Isn't that true? Science is things that are observable. Yes. Guess what about dark matter, dark energy? It's never been observed. Well, then how could it be science? They literally made it up. That's all it is. I might as well be talking about the flux capacitor and the 1.1 gigawatts and have a DeLorean go back in time to 1955 as talk about dark matter and dark energy. And folks, let me tell you, it pains me to say that. Because one firmly is in the realm of a science fiction film, and the other ought to be, but it is in science textbooks. We're just going to make it up. And they're all the same. Isn't that sad? Do people really not want God so much that they'll just make stuff up? Apparently that is the case. The Boötes void. So one day somebody put a telescope, well, it's actually a radio telescope. Because you know the stars sing, right? The scriptures say that the stars sing. They do. They give off radio waves. And so all the stars, they are singing to us every night. So just bask in the sound of stars. You can do that. But there's one section of space that is silent, and it's cold. Matter of fact, it is so silent and so cold, they call it a super void. Now, there are various voids in space. This one is so large that the distance of it, you would have to take 5 of our Milky Way galaxies. It is the largest space. It's called an object, but it's empty. But for lack of a better term, they call it an object. There's nothing there. And it would take 5 of our Milky Way galaxies. They can't explain it. That's why I bring it up. If the universe is eternal, that shouldn't exist. But it does. Why does it exist? Because God made it that way. That's why. And we need to understand that. Isaiah 40, verse 22. God made all things the way that He made them so that we would give Him great honor and glory. Notice this. What about God sitting on the circle of the earth? It's He, God, that sits on the circle of the earth, and the inhabitants thereof are as grasshoppers. He that stretcheth out the heavens as a curtain, and spreads them out as a tent to dwell in. I guess He comes and goes by the great void of the Boötes void. That's not large enough for God to go in and out of the universe, by the way. He's bigger than that. The anthropic principle. What does that mean? We already talked about this, actually. The design of everything. How that the universe is noted to be fine-tuned. Everything is in its place. Everything is ordered and as it should be. And so what do scientists who don't want to regard God, what do they say? Oh, well, there's a multiverse. Again, science fiction. I think they keep coming out with these movies about this multiverse, right? Well, in this universe, the earth is unique and it happens to have life. But in other multiverses then, now I've just assumed believing dark matter and dark energy as a multiverse. Have you ever observed a multiverse? I don't believe I've seen that. Not at least on a daily, regular basis. No, there's just one. There's just one you. Fortunately, there's just one me. David said, "What is man that you came to visit him? Or what is the Son of Man that you visit him, that you consider him at all?" Man is God's special creation because out of all the universe, there's only one that contains the Spirit of God, His image, and that is humanity. Spontaneous generation. I spent a little time listening to, I'm sorry, Chad, about this, but I had to do a little research. And so I had to watch Bill Nye the Science Guy, who, of course, is not a science guy at all as far as biology and geology. No, he's an engineer, but, whatever. So we get to this spontaneous generation, and he says life cannot produce life, and he's right. And I saw the little video of Bill Nye the Science Guy on PBS or whatever he originally came on. And then after he got explaining that, he had this young lady, and she said, now at home you can do this particular experiment, and it looked wonderful, and so you could have this experiment to prove that there's no such thing as spontaneous generation. Because, a long time ago they thought that that was the case. And then, of course, Mr. Louis Pasteur in the 19th century, I think that's like close to 200 years ago now, he came with that particular experiment and said, no, there's no such thing as spontaneous generation. You only get life from life. That's the only place you get life. And then there's another video of Mr. Nye. If it weren't true, I couldn't make it up, folks. Saying that life on earth spontaneously generated. What did God say? We're not going to take the time to read it. Our time really is kind of almost up here. Go back to Genesis 1. Everything reproduces after its own kind. Who gave that kind in the first place? God. That's why we don't have to worry about Mr. and Mrs. Cardinal, do we? We don't have to worry about them. We know that they're going to be cardinals and cardinals and cardinals. Why? Because they reproduce after their own kind. Well, you say, okay, they reproduce after their own kind. Well, how come, beaks get larger and maybe feathers might change colors and things like that? And the thing is that that's microevolution. We see that everywhere. Look, if you but turn your head to the right and to the left, you can see that we're not all the same. And then you say, thank goodness. Why, every single one of us is different, are we not? We're all different in many wonderful, fabulous, awesome ways. We wouldn't want to be the same, would we? We would not want that. But yet, though we are all different, aren't we all human beings? We're all the same kind. There has never been a woman in history who has ever had the thought, I wonder if it's going to be a human being or something else. She has never had that thought. Cookie. Never had that thought. Darwin said that if his theories were true, that there should be missing links everywhere. And everywhere they dig up fossils, oh, we got one. I remember a number of years ago, was in a different town, different state. It was a number of years ago. Someone came to me and they said, Byron, they found a missing link. I said, oh, hang on. I said, you give it 2 months and come back to me. About 2 or 3 weeks later, they came back to me. Oh, it was a hoax. When you have the Lucy fossils, and then you see where Lucy actually came from, small bones, not the whole skeleton, small bones. And then they tell you that they found these bones scattered over a 12-mile area. And you're going to tell me that you know that this is man's predecessor, give me a break. Folks, that's just out and out lying. That is ethically dishonest. How do some of these folks sleep at night? I'm serious. Because they have an agenda of, I don't like God, I want him out. That's how. They justify, and they will tell you that. Well, like some of these false, and they've been proven false, graphs. Haeckel's, that's a big one. Well, we know it's false, but they get the idea. Well, if it's false and you print it knowing it's false, you're lying. What if we said, oh, well, we know this really isn't a proof of God, but we're just going to print it anyway? Don't you know that that'd be on the top of every Time magazine and every newspaper in the whole world? And yet when the science community does that, why, it's not even a blip anywhere. It's dishonest. But we do have evidence. They have, it's not even faith. And sometimes we say, and I understand, I probably have said it too, it takes more faith to believe in no God than God. The problem is that there's no faith involved in not believing in God because there's no evidence that God does not exist. There is evidence that God exists. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. If I see a shadow, what do I know? If I see a shadow, I know that something is producing that shadow. There is an object, and not only that, but I also know that there's a light source as well, right? I don't know what the light source is. I don't know what the object is, but I know both of those things are true. Why? Because I have evidence. I observe it. Last thing. This is a really long word, and I apologize about that. Uniformitarianism and assumptions. And I told Jennifer that I was going to do something this morning that heretofore I don't think I've ever done before. It's a prop. You know what this is? I don't know if you can see this or not, but this is my penny savings. What if I told you that every day I put 1 penny in there? Every day I put 1 penny in there. And then you go about seeing how many days it's been when I started, right? You want to go back, well, when did he start? Here's the problem with that. You have to make a ton of assumptions. All I told you was every day I put a penny in there. I didn't say that I started with nothing, did I? I didn't tell you that there are some days where there's too much month and not enough money. So there might have been a couple of months where I didn't put anything in there every single day. I didn't tell you that I did some moonlighting in some other area and I got a windfall, and so I put a whole bunch of pennies in there. You see all the assumptions that you have to make to see when I started? Well, guess what? All these dating things that scientists use to date things, that's exactly what they do. They assume a whole lot. Now, they don't tell you that, do they? They don't give you all of the assumptions. Granted, some of them actually might give you an assumption or two, but they're not going to give you everything. So the dating methods are highly unreliable. And there's this new one now. It's still the same situation. It's better. I wish I could remember the exact element that they use. Some of you might know better than I do, but they are trying. They are trying. It's still not good. One quick thing, I tell you, our time is up. Some of this stuff is so fascinating to me. It might not be fascinating to you, but I got to thinking, okay, if the earth is 4.5 billion years old, what did the sun look like 4.5 billion years ago? Because, you know, if we continue, a billion years from now, the sun's going to explode and stuff, and we won't be here. You do know that, right? We have a billion years. That's all we got. Sorry, I apologize. The universe isn't infinite. It's not eternal. Sorry. 4.5 billion years ago, the sun would have been huge. Well, I was wrong. Because they know how they know a little bit about developing stars and things like that. 4.5 billion years ago, the sun was too cold. It was there. It was about the same size, but it was not giving off the radiation that it is giving now. So Earth would have been too cold to have started life to begin with. Then they come with Mr. Nye and his so-called experiment. Oh, well, we think that there was ammonia in the atmosphere, and so that's what helped the primordial ooze to produce life. Yeah, the problem with that is it's called the cool sun paradox. The problem with the ammonia is that the ultraviolet light would have done away with all that ammonia, or at least most of it. So that ammonia atmosphere, not even possible. You can't make this stuff up. God is the uncaused cause. The Apostle Paul noted that, Acts 17, verse 24. God made heaven and earth and all things that are therein. He made everything. He caused everything to be. But here is our question for the hour. Why does this make a difference? Why do I need to know these things? And Chad led this wonderful song, Our God, He is Alive. And Brother Dykus here, he worked for NASA. Did you know that? Brother Dykus, he's the one that wrote this song. He worked for NASA. He was one that believed in God. Obviously he did. Verse 4. He tells you, look, we know God exists. We see all the wonderful works that He's made. But verse 4, he concludes, why do we need to know that God made everything? What a wonderful conclusion. Because God made everything, our God, who hung upon a tree, a life was willing there to give, that He from sin might set man free, and evermore with Him could live. What is the purpose of noting that God exists and we can prove that He exists? Because God sent His Son for you and me. That's the conclusion. I need Him. I need saving because I have broken the law of the lawgiver. God is the lawgiver of all laws. And if you have broken His laws, that makes you a sinner. How then can you come back to God? He wants you to come to Him in His way. By believing in Him, repenting of your sins, confessing that He is the Son of God, and being baptized for the remission of your sins. In baptism, one comes into contact with that blood that the Father made sure that His Son shed on the cross for you and me. We come in contact with that blood. It might be that you haven't done that, and you need to do that this very hour. The water is ready. We want you to obey the gospel of Jesus the Christ. It might be this morning that you have done that, and yet you have left His way, and you need to come back to Him. If you have a need this morning, why don't you come right now while we stand and while we sing.
Today is the day of salvation.
Tomorrow may be too late.
There's danger and death in delaying, protect God's saving grace. There's something the cross he has lifted, the young while yet you may. He's earnestly pleading, oh, make no delay. Tomorrow may be too late. Today is a day of salvation. Tomorrow may be too late. The judgment day there is coming. Prepare ye for that day. The Son and mercy he offers, no kind while yet you may. Is freedom from sin and bring sweet peace with him. Tomorrow may be too late. Today is the day of salvation. Tomorrow may be too late. Our home up in heaven is waiting. Break the heart today. Repent and confess and be baptized. There is no other way. If Jesus is life and the Son in this way, tomorrow may be too